Get ready for an amazing raised planter box with an awesome twist. A foldable table that will allow you to see your beautiful garden while having breakfast or a morning coffee with your family. In this video you'll learn how I've made this awesome planter box from raw timber with minimal tools and low cost, and how you can do it too. I'll also talk about what I could have done better and answer some commonly asked questions. So let's talk about the structure itself. A 3.65 meters wide, 90 centimeters tall and 45 centimeters deep structure, which in freedom units is about 12 feet wide, 3 feet tall and 17¾ inch deep. A structure that has been divided into two separate parts, made from 25mm by 15 cm timber boards and 4 by 6 cm squares, which is about 1 inch by 6 inches board and 1.5 inches by 2 3/5 inch squares. The tables were 45 centimeters deep and 1.2 meters wide each. That's about 1.5 foot deep and 4 foot wide. Now, if these dimensions make absolutely no sense in inches, that's because I have no idea how inches actually work. But what you will need to make this work, however, is fairly simple. Effectively a hand drill, saw of any kind, it could be like this one, or this, or this. An electric or hand planer, some form of a sander, wood screws, 4 hinges, I've used these as I've already had them, and paintbrush. And you're good to go, I think. I'll include Amazon links to anything I've used in this project or any recommendation I can give you. Now, before I've done all of that work, my patio looked like this. It sucked. I mean, it pretty much unnecessarily covered my whole garden and made the patio feel claustrophobic. So in the first step, I've gotten rid of the fence, cutting any metal parts that remained with an angle grinder. That's not usually part of making a raised bed, but it had to be done. Once I knew how many parts I need, I got to cutting in my piece of shit workshop, using the cheapest tools that you can potentially think of. And yes, I do appreciate it's a massive huge mess that I have in my workshop. I haven't gotten to organizing it yet. As a typical DIYer, I'm doing 20 projects simultaneously and have no time to actually clean in between. Normally, DIYers will try to sell you their favorite company making tools. I don't have one. I just get whatever is on a discount, with exception of anything that requires additional safety. Make sure to protect your eyes, ears and lungs whenever cutting and sanding the wood. I tend to do it. Most of the time. Anyway, in this case I needed 24 pieces of 1.8 meters wooden boards, which was effectively the total length divided by 2. 34 pieces of 40 centimeters long boards, which was effectively the depth minus 2 times wood thickness. And 8 90 centimeters pieces of squares to work as a corner reinforcement, which was effectively the height. For convenience, I've used some multiplication of the width of the boards. On top of that, to make the two tables, I needed 6 1.2 meters long boards and 8 40 centimeters long boards. And once that's done, I've cleaned all of this wood with an electric planer and sanded it off with a planetary sander, because I hate having free time and I love having sawdust in my ears. After that, I've used 2 coats of wood sealer and 1 coat of stain to protect it from pests, water and generally terrible weather conditions, which in my country there's a lot of. Especially as with this amount of work, I'd like it to last many years. And nobody really mentions this step in DIY projects, as it lasts freaking ages. 12 hours between coats, that's often 3 days before you can actually assemble it. But hey, they do be looking awesome after it. In my case, the stain had a maple shading, and after 2 coats, it did look pretty awesome. Now, once all of the wood is prepared, here's a quick assembly. I'm starting with assembling the sides to squares, sanding it even so that it seems like it's made by someone who knows what they're doing. Then adding sides, reinforcement in the middle and staining it again, because hey, you can never have too much protection. The tables were pretty simple too. Once assembled, which I don't really have recorded, but it looks pretty much something like this. I mean, it's really not that complicated. Anyway, I've used this type of hinge to connect it, and it does a pretty good job so far. On retrospective, I would however use a slightly different hinge, which I will mention later in the video. To connect this with the main body, I've effectively placed spacers in between the main body and the table and rested on top of my head while I screwed them to the base. After that, you've guessed it, it's time to have it marinated in stain again. Before I lowered them to the ground, I've made a base with concrete and old bricks, which sadly I haven't got recorded, but I'm sure you can find a way to make a reasonable foundation for your raised box. I believe in you. I would suggest to put a polyethylene tape between wherever the wood contacts the ground, in my case where it touched the patio as well, so that water doesn't sit on the wood itself and it takes more time for it to rot. In case of such a tall box, I would suggest to also screw it to something else quite high up so that it doesn't accidentally tip, especially as you're using the table and you will be putting the weight on it. One additional thing I have done after I thought I was finished was making the space for ground shallower, as after calculating the weight and the amount of soil to fill this bastard up, we've decided to change our plans. When it comes to the separation of soil and wood, I've used a polyethylene 10mm foam sheet and landscape fabric on top of it. Considering it's combined with treated wood, it should last a fairly long time. In our case, we've decided to plant lavender and any other plant that gets rid of my arch nemesis, mosquitoes. I absolutely hate them. I think there will be some strawberries there at some point as well. So there we go, a beautiful and functional raised bed that pretty much anyone can do at home, exactly how they need. But it could be better. I would definitely suggest to pre-drill any screws nearby the edges of the boards and would probably use a different set of hinges than I've used here. Maybe something like I'll show on the screen. The current one does a pretty good job so far, but I do worry about how long it's going to last due to it being connected by screws in a fairly small area to timber, which is not the hardest wood. I would expect this specific assembly to break and wear out over time, so I will be changing it. There's also been concerns about bugs, ants and general predators preying on the food wherever we're eating. And well, so far we're not seeing that. We've already had a lot of parties and barbecues and the interest was quite minimal. Not really much different from having a table in your backyard or a picnic, at least in my climate. I would definitely recommend this project as it's simple, functional and reasonably fun to do. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to see more projects like this, comment, like and subscribe.